Welcome to the On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for obesity medicine news with your host, man on the pen, Dave Knapp. Welcome to On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast for this Tuesday, May 6th, 2025. I'm your host, Dave Knapp, man on the Manjaro. That's why I'm here. You are on the pen. Wegovy, Saxenda, Victoza, Trulicity, Manjaro, Zepbound, Compound. That pen, it's what we talk about here at On the Pen, the Weekly Dose podcast, your one-stop shop for incretin mimetic news, for all your news in obesity medicine that prepares you and empowers you to have more competent and confident conversations with your medical providing team. A lot to get into this week. We're going to wade through it all together on this live edition of the podcast. So if you're listening later on Apple, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, know that a lot of times we either air this live or record this live on YouTube. We stream it to LinkedIn, everywhere else as well. And you can join us live in the comments. So welcome. I'm just going to give a quick shout out to Terry, Tammy, Lynn, MM, Dunleary, Grooney, and I know I saw Melody and GLP-1 Real Talk. Our friend Kelly is in the house as well. I know there are more of you jumping in here now, even as we speak. So thank you for joining. So we're going to jump right into the news this week. I want to highlight the fact that over the course of the last 10 days, we started a Substack, which has absolutely skyrocketed. I'm excited to report that as of today, it is the 15th ranking Substack in the health and wellness category on Substack after just being on it for just over a week. And we have the opportunity, if we can get about 15 more paid subscribers, we will be hitting a chart on Substack for the bestsellers list that will help get tens of thousands more eyes on our Substack, which if you don't know what Substack is, just a brief flyover is it's just basically a website, a social media platform that allows content creators to write blog articles and post and publish content, but it delivers it directly to your inbox. And when you're on YouTube or you're on TikTok or you're on Instagram, you are 100% subject to the algorithm as to whether or not you see our content. So you may follow us, but the algorithm is going to decide what you see and what you don't see. So if you want more power over that, you can go to onthepen.substack.com and just put your email address in. All it's going to do is sign you up for emails where Substack will just push my content right to your inbox. And if you want to become a paid subscriber, just a very small portion of our content will live behind a paywall. That will be reserved for some of the more in-depth analysis that I do at On the Pen. And you're helping to build a platform that is the first of its kind, the first obesity-centric news source platform that empowers patients. And so you're being you're joining when you become a paid member of the Substack, literally one of the, or if it is the first of its kind. And so you're getting in on the ground floor of something that is absolutely amazing. So we published a lot of the news that we're going to talk about on the podcast on the Substack this week, but it's always interesting to me how these stories kind of come together to paint a bigger picture, right? A lot of people, you can regurgitate the news. That is not a hard thing to do, but putting the news in the broader context of what it means for patients is the challenge, right? You have to be really dialed into this news. So I want to jump right into some of the biggest news of last week. And this happened around the earnings call of Eli Lilly, right before the earnings call that Eli Lilly had last week, which is a very interesting earnings call. We covered it in an exhaustive video here on YouTube if you want the full rundown of that. But we learned that morning that if you're on Zepbound and CVS Caremark manages your pharmacy benefits, that starting July 1st of 2025, Zepbound is going to be removed from their standard formularies, as CVS Caremark and Novo Nordisk struck a deal making Wegovy the preferred GLP-1 medication for obesity treatment. And so for tens of thousands of people who are on Zepbound, they are literally going to have their prescriptions transferred over to Wegovy. Their doctors are going to have to write a new script, and it's going to be very challenging for them to stay on Zepbound. Now, I want to highlight, and we covered this in the Substack as well, but I want to highlight a couple of things that you need to be doing right now, like this minute, to prepare for this in order to stay on Zepbound if that is the decision that you and your doctor come to. And the first thing I'd like to highlight is that Wegovy and Zepbound are not different. They're both GLP medicines, GLP-1 medications, but they're not interchangeable. Zepbound, obviously, most of the listeners here are super educated and know that Tirzepatide targets two hormones, GLP and GIP. So Wegovy is not a one-for-one swap. It doesn't target. In fact, Tirzepatide, the active ingredient in Mounjaro and Zepbound, is actually a 5-to-1 ratio GIP to GLP-1. So it's much more a GIP medication than it is even a GLP-1 medication. And that's before you get into the efficacy. Now, when you get into the efficacy, the closest that you can get is the high dose of 2.4 Wegovy in the clinical trials matched up best to about the 5 milligram dose of Zepbound when it comes to long-term weight loss. So what do you do if you're on the 7.5 or the 10 or the 12.5 or the 15 milligram of Zepbound? Well, one of the things that you need to talk to your doctor about is filing a continuation of care request. If you're already on Zepbound and it's working, and especially if you're on those higher doses, you need to have your doctor file a continuation of care request, which would make the case that switching medications would actually interrupt your progress or cause you harm. Your provider will actually have to include notes that describe your clinical response and explain why changing treatments would be unsafe or inappropriate for you. You can also request a formulary exception because Zepbound and Wegovy are not the same, as we talked about. Your provider can actually submit a formulary exception based upon medical necessity. So if you've tried Wegovy before, especially, and it didn't work, or if your body needs that dual approach and your provider can make that case, they should be able to document that clearly and include trial data from Surmount if possible, especially if that top dose of Wegovy is not going to get you to where you are at equivalency wise on Tirzepatide. The other thing that I want to flag, and I thank followers of the Substack for flagging this too. I should have thrown this in the article, but that's why we have such an informed audience here, and I'm so thankful for all of you. If you have obstructive sleep apnea, Tirzepatide, Zepbound, is the only medicine that is actually approved for the treatment of obstructive sleep apnea in patients living with obesity. So in order to stay on Zepbound, one of the best things that you can do if you haven't done it already is get a sleep study. Find out if you have obstructive sleep apnea, because again, this deal brokered between Novo Nordisk and CVS Caremark is for the obesity indication alone for Wegovy. And so there are other indications by which you can get Zepbound that would be obstructive sleep apnea. So there are other ways to get it. You can, again, check out all this information in our Substack. We even link to some helpful resources that can help your doctor write an effective note to your insurance company on the formulary exception or continuation of care side of things. So definitely check that out. Another plug for the Substack that's on the pen.substack.com. Just put your email in. It's the easiest way to do it. Help us climb the charts. And I forgot to mention this at the outset, but I've been super reflective and contemplative lately because a month from tomorrow, I turn 40 years old. 40 years old. Like I can't wrap my head around the fact that I am going to be 40 years old. And so one month from tomorrow, I turn 40. And it is just absolutely blowing my mind. But I do have a goal, and that's to be in the top 10 of podcasts and the top 10 of Substack. By the time I get 40, we got a month to do it. So I need you to jump over to onthepen.substack.com. Subscribe if you want to become a paid subscriber. You can help us to reach that goal a lot faster as it bumps us up in the charts. The other thing is if you don't, and some people say, hey, I don't really have the extra income. That's fine. Most of our content that we make, our content hasn't changed. It hasn't become a paywall behind our content. It's just a very tiny amount behind the Substack paywall, in-depth analysis that is new, right? Everything else remains free. 90% of what you're going to get on Substack is going to remain not behind a paywall. But if you don't have the extra $12.99 a month to pay, then that's fine. An easy way to help bump us is to get us to the top of the podcast charts by simply going over the podcast and give it a 5-star rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. So another plug to help us get to the top 10 by 40. The top 10 by 40. That would be an excellent. I would be able to swallow that pill of becoming 40 years old a lot easier if we entered 40 in the top 10 of medical podcasts in the US and the top 10 of all Substacks. So we kind of laid the groundwork for the next thing I want to talk about. And while this is sort of specific to people in Iowa, there are things happening all around the country that you can be doing to advocate for a big topic of conversation that we talk about on this podcast, which is PBM reform. Now, PBMs, if you're not familiar with what a PBM even is, you're like, a PBM, Dave, what even is that? Well, a PBM just stands for Pharmacy Benefits Manager. And a pharmacy benefits manager is essentially the gatekeeper for the drugs that your insurance covers. And in many cases, PBMs are actually owned by the insurance companies. Right now, I could go into a long diatribe about the Affordable Care Act and how it sort of set insurance companies up to buy PBMs because the Affordable Care Act actually capped how profitable an insurance company could be. So then they bought up all the PBMs and started making their money back that way. But long story short, PBMs are absolutely fleecing sick Americans, and they're making medical decisions for Americans, as evidenced by that earlier story of the deal that they're making with Novo Nordisk. Same old song and dance between big pharma and the PBMs, blocking access or demanding that patients switch medications. It's practicing medicine, and it is absolutely codified corruption in this country that we're allowing people behind a desk to make medical decisions for somebody they will never even lay their eyes on. It is absolutely absurd. But many states are taking legislation up into their own hands. In Iowa, which is my home state, actually the Iowa Senate on the 28th of April, which was Mrs. OTP's birthday, passed legislation aimed at regulating pharmacy benefit managers to support rural pharmacies and control prescription drugs. Now, to sort of talk about, the heart of this, which is supporting rural pharmacies, there was another story that came out this past week. Again, we covered it on our Substack, but Rite Aid, which is entering bankruptcy. So, okay, it's not lost on me that this is a pharmacy that is facing some very serious financial problems. But over the past couple of weeks, they stopped filling GLP-1s for people. They just said, we're not offering them anymore. And there hasn't been a formal press release from Rite Aid on this. But I want to sort of give some color as to what is happening because of the PBMs. So what is happening here with Rite Aid? Yes, it's happening because of their financial problems, but I think we will see this, and you're already seeing this trickle down to local independent pharmacies. So as a quick flyover, pharmacies don't actually decide how much they're going to be reimbursed for filling your prescriptions. That decision comes from the PBMs. It comes from the pharmacy benefits managers. They're the powerful middlemen who sit in between your pharmacy and your insurance company and the drug manufacturer. And right now, for many GLP-1s, in fact, most GLP-1s, the amount that PBMs reimburse the pharmacies for is actually less than what the pharmacy paid to stock the medication in the first place. So it's like they buy it for $950, but they're only getting paid back $875 over and over and over every time somebody comes and fills a GLP-1. Like, that math is not going to math for very long. But here's the deeper problem. Pharmacies don't have any choice but to contract these PBMs to stay in business. They don't have a choice. In most cities, most towns across America, there are just a few insurance plans that cover most of the population in any given area. Those plans are typically tied to the largest employers. So if the pharmacies don't contract with the PBMs that run those plans, they'll lose access to like every patient in the area or most of the patients in that area. So it's like opening a gas station, but being told that you can't accept Visa or MasterCard, right? You're going to have gas just like every other gas station, but there will be no way for the people to pay for it. So if you look at this issue and you just say, well, the pharmacies could just raise the price to make up the difference. They can't. Because the PBM contracts that they're entered in explicitly prevent pharmacies from charging more than the negotiated price. Did you catch that? The PBM contracts actually prevent the pharmacies from charging more than the negotiated price. So the pharmacy is stuck accepting the rate that it's given, even if it means that they're going to lose $50 every time somebody fills a GLP-1. The other crazy part is that these deals that they have to sign with the PBMs often have gag clauses built into these agreements. In other words, the pharmacy can't even tell you this because they're contractually obligated not to. Case in point, these clauses make it impossible for these pharmacies to tell patients that sometimes when you go to fill a medication, it would be cheaper to fill a medication without running it through insurance, because again, the insurance, the PBMs negotiate what's charged for the medication, not the pharmacy in this case. But the pharmacy may have that same drug at a cash pay price for less than what you're paying with your copay. But again, the pharmacies are contractually gagged. They cannot tell you that it'd be cheaper to do that because the PBMs force them to be silent. That's the PBMs, and that's how they work. That's why this is legalized corruption. So back to the state of Iowa, they have passed PBM reform through the Senate, which has effectively helped to support local independent pharmacies because of exactly this type of thing. So some of the key provisions is that they're proposing a pass-through pricing model where PBMs are required to adopt a pass-through pricing model, ensuring transparency throughout that drug pricing. Again, like they should know, patients should know how much their drug costs with insurance, how much it costs without insurance. There's reimbursement rates clauses in there. PBMs must reimburse pharmacies at or above the national or Iowa average acquisition for the cost of medication. So in other words, they can't just come in and dictate, we're not going to reimburse you appropriately for this. Pharmacy choice. So the bill prohibits PBMs from limiting or disincentivizing individuals for selecting a pharmacy or pharmacist of their choice. Why should you be forced to go to a special pharmacy, oftentimes owned by the PBMs, right? CVS Caremark. What is the prefix of that? CVS, a pharmacy. And many of these insurance companies own the PBMs, and they own the specialty pharmacies that they require you to go to for those expensive medications. What if you like working with your local pharmacist? What if your local pharmacist has saved your butt time and time again because they catch something that your physician didn't catch, right? It's absolutely crazy what's going on here, and this is fighting back. There's mail order restrictions barring PBMs from requiring customers to use their mail order pharmacies. There's an appeals process that must be provided for pharmacies to challenge reimbursement rates. There's so much good baked into this. It is known as Senate Study Bill 1084, and we have got to support the ultimate passage of this bill. So what you're going to do is you're going to go to my link tree if you live in the state of Iowa, and there is a form that you can fill out that's going to send that form off to your legislators to advocate for the passage of this PBM reform. And we have got to support things when our states listen, there seems to be bipartisan support for this on the Hill, but the problem is there's so much lobbying that goes on up there that I am hard pressed to believe anything meaningful happens, right? And so when our states look at legislation like this that has the power to really change things, we need to get behind it and offer it our support. So go to my link tree. It's linked in the description of my YouTube channel. And you should be able to find that first button there that will help you fill out that form for your representative. Again, that's for only people in the state of Iowa. So I know that 99% of you who listen to the podcast are not in the state of Iowa, but for those of you who are, this is a great opportunity. And if you're not in the state of Iowa, simply do a Google search for PBM reform and then enter your state. Most states are doing something. Find a way to get behind it. Find a way to get your voice involved in that legislation and make sure that it's comprehensive and effective, and then get behind it and support it. Some of the easy, low-hanging fruit for advocacy. The last thing I want to jump to today, and I appreciate y'all bearing with me on this podcast because so much of this podcast has been dedicated over the last year to accessibility. And listen, nobody has followed the OFA versus the FDA lawsuit closer than On the Pen. And we have great relationships with a lot of the parties involved. So we have a pretty good beat on what is going on in the world of the OFA versus the FDA trial. Now I have contact with the OFA on pretty much a weekly basis, a little bit more consistent than that even. So one of the things that happened yesterday is a rumor started floating around because of a update on the Pacer, which Pacer is basically just a website where you can track filings in different court cases around the country. And there was an update on Pacer that essentially confused some people on Reddit, which led to a lot of bad information getting out there. So the rumor going around is that there was a ruling made in the OFA versus the FDA Tirzepatide lawsuit. That is not true. What actually dropped late yesterday afternoon, was an order dismissing a prior appeal. So the OFA had actually, what they had done was that they filed an appeal after the judge denied the preliminary injunction. That preliminary injunction was simply just a way that OFA could petition the court to say, hey, while this lawsuit's going on, protect the people we're representing from basically enforcement. Let the 503Bs cook while this lawsuit goes on. The judge did deny that at the time, which did not feel like very good news for the OFA in the final ultimate outcome of this lawsuit. So at that time, the OFA filed an appeal with the Fifth Circuit Court, basically appealing that decision. Well, we know that this week the judge is going to issue a summary judgment. In other words, I shouldn't say we know this week that it's going to happen, but all eyes are on Friday of this week. It could come sooner and it could come later, but our money's on probably this Friday. It could drag on a little bit longer than that. We shall see. Nobody really knows what the judge is going to do in this situation. But what we do know is that we covered extensively how some of the data that was presented by Eli Lilly and the FDA was definitely called into question. And really, the judge and the OFA caught Lilly in using some data that was inconsistent, right, about their manufacturing capacity, future supply, and demand issues. And there was inconsistencies in the filings that they had. And so we do believe that shakes out in the OFA's favor for this. And we're hopeful for a ruling in the OFA's favor on this. Again, the OFA represents 503B outsourcing facilities, which are able to make essentially copies of these branded medications when they're in shortage. This whole lawsuit is over the way that the FDA determined this. And it seems like the judge is seeing that this was just a wink and a nod between Big Pharma and the FDA. No surprise there to any of us who follow this closely. So we're hoping for a ruling this week, but there has been no ruling so far. We are expecting that will come as early as this Friday. And no matter which way it goes, just know that there's going to be appeals. There's going to be a process involved in taking another look at through the appeals courts, whatever the judge decides here. But this is probably long-term going to be something that drags out, but we'll continue to follow it as closely as we possibly can. That's why I would really encourage you once again to go follow our Substack. That's onthepen.substack.com. And that is where you're going to get updates right to your inbox. Again, the algorithm chooses what you see. Whether you're watching on YouTube or LinkedIn or Instagram or Facebook or what have you, the algorithm chooses what information you get to consume. When you sign up for our Substack, which is literally just putting your email in, all this news goes right to your inbox so that you can have in real time more competent and confident conversations with your medical providing team. Now, before we go, would be remiss if we didn't thank our partners, Row. Row brings the podcast to us every week by sponsoring us. If you haven't heard about Row, they are a company that offers a program called the Row Body Program. If you're looking at GLP-1s for treatment of obesity, I highly recommend our partners at Row. You can visit row.co/OTP and learn more about how patients on the Row Body Program are losing 15 to 20% of their body weight in a year when coupled with lifestyle modifications. Of course, if you're looking at getting on any medication, it's imperative that you associate yourself with the potential risks All those are going to be available on the Ro website. You can start by going to ro.co/OTP, click around and find some information about these medications. We thank you to Ro. Thank you for being the best part of what we do at On the Pen. Couldn't, wouldn't, and shouldn't do without you. Help us to get to top 10 by 40. That's a 5-star rating and review on the podcast and a sign up over at Substack. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being the best part of what we do. And we will catch you on the next one. Thank you, my friends. Really appreciate y'all.